Hello friends, for today's video I want to go through a list of some adult fantasy spring recommendations. Before jumping into the books themselves, I do want to establish what I'm referring to when I say spring recommendations. I do think for all of the other seasons, even without explanation, you have a pretty good idea of what the recommendations are going to entail. So for example, you expect for summer recommendations hot settings. However, we also recognize that there's something unrelated to settings that are often tied to the recommendations that are rooted in seasons. So going back to the summer recommendations, besides just hot settings, we also have this concept of a summer blockbuster. What I wanted to do with spring recommendations is not only have things that feel associated with spring in a very obvious way, but also capture thematic elements as well. The ones that are a little bit more obvious, we have the rebirth factor as well as animals, because of course springtime is when we expect there to be so many more animals. They're coming out of hibernation, they're having babies, and so I wanted to find some books that had animal or creature companions. Also, I wanted to ensure for the rebirth factor, we're talking about maybe stories that you do have this, we're replaying something, we're doing something again, or we're almost having a metaphorical rebirth where somebody feels like they're coming through something and coming out on the other side. Somewhat related to this, we also have hope and resistance. I do think that the winter ones, there is this bleakness to winter, but spring, you're finally starting to feel that hope again. And with that hope comes a resilient spirit and resistance. So I wanted to find books that I think feel very much like they are rooted in pushing back against something and fighting forward. And then we'll have a couple that have this sense of appreciation or a slight coziness, because I do think for a lot of people, there is almost this cottage feel to spring for them, so I wanted to ensure that we had a couple of those as well. There will be some overlap between the recommendations, so I'm not going to have a label on the screen and go through them in that way. I'm just going to kind of talk about these, and you'll know that that is something to do with the books that I'm going to be talking about today. And on that note, let's finally jump into it. While I just got done saying that I'm not necessarily going to tell you exactly which thing ties to which book, it's pretty obvious with this first one. Also, if you don't know, I recommend books even if they didn't work for me, which is true of this first one, but it was too perfect to not say, and I know some of you will really enjoy this, and that would be How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying. The idea behind this book is that the main character is stuck in this loop. She somehow was transported from what would seem to be our own world into a fantasy world. She has no idea how she got here. She's been stuck here, and it seems like she will continuously be stuck here until she does fill in the blank she doesn't know. But she has died over and over and over again, and every time she does, she starts over back at the beginning of what seems to be this quest line. For the longest time, she has been trying to become the savior of these people, the chosen one type. But she's tried that so many times and failed that she decides, what if I just go for being the villain for once? And that is what she decides to do. That is the setup for this. It's very self-aware. It also is very, very vulgar, over-the-top, violent, and it has that kind of Deadpool way of telling you the story where it is very much tagging you along with the character. If that is your cup of tea, then this is probably going to fit your tastes perfectly. We also have the Drowning Empire series. This is a completed trilogy, and within this there are wonderful animal companions. Once again, I'm telling on myself for what inspired this recommendation, but it's a pretty obvious one. Additionally, though, I think that this is a good one for the fall season as well, because there are actually horror elements baked into the plot line within the first book. I think it becomes much more fantasy as you progress throughout the series. And there are fantasy elements in the first one. It's just a little bit more of a genre bender and hybrid within book one. The setup is that you have a few different perspectives. The main two would be a young man who is trying to find his missing wife, and then the other perspective is the heir to the throne. However, she has lost most of her memories, including the ones that have to do with the magic that allows for their land to function. And this is through these almost like automatons that are created through bone shards. Everybody in their empire has to give a piece of bone, and it is how they construct these things, and it is through their magic that the emperor can give them commands, and it allows for things to carry out throughout their kingdom. She doesn't remember a lot of the training that she's had, so she's trying to gain her memories back. There's a lot of really strange eerie things occurring as well within her perspective. And then you have a few other perspectives as well, and it all kind of is just starting to build within that first book. It's very unique, very different from a lot of the things I've read before. It takes a little bit before you feel like your feet are firmly on the ground, but the animal companion aspect of this is wonderful. I absolutely loved it. Probably the highlight of the series for me. The next two, I'm going to bounce between an oldie but a goodie as well as a newer release. We'll start with the newer release, which would be The Everlasting. Within this story, you are examining the way that stories themselves are often reshaped and retold to fit the purposes of people in modern day. But then you kind of go a step further and you actually see what happens if I could literally change the story in the past. What if I made this little tweak? What if I made it so that this person was the one to resist? What if nobody ever resisted at all and the hero actually turned out to just give up? And you have all these little tweaks and you're examining how that would impact hundreds of years later and how people in power would use the changes in these stories to their advantage. And within this, you actually have characters that are caught up in it and they are forced to be the ones to really feel the effects in a more tangible and literal way. The writing in this was exquisite. There were so many things to the themes, not just the ones I mentioned, but additional themes as well, that I think were really, really well articulated. I haven't really read anything quite like this or that made me feel the way that this book made me feel. I thought that the writing was very poignant and cutting. I really was taken aback, and it's also a standalone, so if you are looking for a one and done kind of book, this one will accomplish that. As for the oldie but a goodie, we have the Mistborn trilogy. I feel like the hope resistance factor is just literally on page within this series. You have a character that says, I am the thing that you cannot kill, I am hope. So much of this story, I know people love to talk about the magic system and the characters and the twists and turns over the course of the trilogy, and all of that is fair and all of that is great. But at its heart, it is in a lot of ways a story of resistance. It's a story of rising up against authority and oppressive powers. And within this, you follow two main characters. You have Kelsier and Vin, along with a lot of other side characters who will, for a lot of people, steal their hearts. But these two main characters, Kelsier is the leader of the resistance. He is specifically trying to allow for the Ska population, who are the people who are oppressed, to feel confident in rising up, and he also wants to give them the tools and the means to do that. He uses his Mistborn abilities, which is where you have metals that you can ingest, and then you get different powers based off of the metals that you ingest. He is using the powers that he has, and then he is also teaching our other protagonist, Vin, how to use her powers as well. It feels a little silly at this point to recommend Mistborn because I know Brandon Sanderson's a household name. Feels like everybody knows Brandon Sanderson at this point or knows his books. But for a lot of people, if you've never read a Sanderson book, it's one of those things where you've heard about him possibly, you're tangentially aware or very aware because people are always recommending him. But for some, the more you hear about something, the less you feel like you actually know what any of the books are about, and then you almost feel like you don't know how to ask, and you're scared to look because of spoilers. So hopefully, if you are somebody that falls into that camp, that's enough of an idea of that trilogy to maybe pique your interest if it sounds like something that you might enjoy. Next up, we have one that probably more so falls into speculative fiction, but I still wanted to mention it, and that would be Kindred by Octavia Butler. This is very harrowing. It is deeply unsettling. The idea is that you have a woman from relatively modern day going back, for reasons she doesn't understand or know, into a time when she would have been somebody to be enslaved, and there is this young boy who at the beginning of the story she saves, this young boy from the past. However, each time she is thrust into the past, this young boy is growing into a man, and where he started as somebody who is pretty innocent because he was just a child, you're seeing that each time she goes back, he's becoming crueler, and also it's becoming more commonplace to enact this cruelty. And there are a lot of questions that arise about how much the past impacts the present day, how much there is still this lasting trauma, even if it feels like you have decades between that and also what is occurring now. There are still lasting effects and consequences of those acts. And then additionally, how do you shape people? How do you change people? How do you show people that what they're doing is wrong? And it can feel like such an impossibility. And oftentimes, even if you lead with compassion, understanding, and in her case, she even saved him when he was a child, sometimes society and also there not being anything within you that says otherwise, it can lead you to become a monster, and what do you do in the face of that? Going to something that's not nearly as heavy, we have Travis Baldry's works, which this definitely is something that gets recommended for the fall. There is some overlap, of course, between fall and spring recommendations, and also for people that live in the southern hemisphere, you actually will probably enjoy that there's overlap because then it feels more fitting to what you are experiencing right now. But Travis Baldry's works are, of course, very, very cozy, but there is specifically within a couple of them this feeling of starting over and what that entails. I would say the very first one, definitely Legends and Lattes. We have a character who is starting a new chapter, and they specifically want to start this new chapter by having a coffee shop. And then also in what is the third book as far as in publishing order, but depending on how you look at it, it's kind of like a sequel to Legends and Lattes. If you don't know, I'll clarify really quick. There's Legends and Lattes, then there is a prequel story called Bookshops and Bone Dust, and then there's the one that's more so a sequel, which would be Brigands and Bread Knives. And in this story, you're following a different character that was friends with the character Viv from Legends and Lattes, and this character, a similar situation. It's less so that they know there's this new chapter, and it's more like they feel like a chapter is ending, but they don't know what comes next, but they also feel like they're supposed to be content with what they have. And I do feel like both that and Legends and Lattes have certain thematic pieces that feel very similar to what happens when winter is over and you have this new beginning. Next up, we have a book that I would say more technically falls under romantasy, fantasy romance, and that would be The God and the Gumiho, as well as The God and the Iguishin, which is the sequel to The God and the Gumiho. The God and the Iguishin is a little bit more rooted in my thoughts for spring, although you would want to read the first one, of course, before reading the second. This story, if you do give it a shot, just know it doesn't take itself seriously at all, and I think that's part of the fun. In the first book, you follow a character who is essentially a fallen god, and he has the chance to get his godhood back if he is basically like a detective of the supernatural, all the various different kinds of creatures that most everyday people don't know about. If he solves crimes and if he is able to monitor a lot of what is going on with these creatures, then he does this enough times, they'll give him his godhood back. Then you have another character who is this notorious nine-tailed fox, and she, the Gumiho, is somebody who realizes that this person is probably going to be investigating her, so she decides the best way to thwart his investigation is if she becomes his assistant, and then she can derail his investigation into her. But when this occurs, she kind of gets roped up into some other things he's investigating, and the two of them have to work together, and shenanigans ensue. It is really over the top, it's really ridiculous, and it has a lot of fun with it. Within the next one, you have where the setting is slightly different. It is this cruise ship where people who have died and are waiting to be reincarnated hang out. It's called, I think, the Flatliner, which is hilarious to me to this day. And you are, once again, trying to figure things out. There is always slightly an investigation detective feel to it, but there is a little bit of a change with some of what's transpiring within the second one, and I believe there will eventually be a third. So if you are looking to jump into a newer series and get excited for the release later, this one, it is a lot of fun, it's a blast, and it's a little less heavy than a few of the other ones on this list. Speaking of really heavy and returning to that again, we have Sword of Kaigen. This one, I would say, is a little bit more metaphorical in the way that I'm interpreting how this relates to spring and some of the thematic pieces that I mentioned before. In this story, you follow two main perspectives, a mother and her son, and you do actually go back and forth between the mother's past and the present, and you are seeing the way that she used to be this rebellious type of person, this vigilante type of person, but in modern day, she seems like a shell of her former self. But you're starting to peel back the layers and discover why. And then you're also looking at her son, who is learning more about the world and how maybe the things he's been told in the past isn't exactly what his reality turns out to be. And as he questions, the mother starts to both be proud of him, but also be in fear for him, as they do not live in a society that really allows for questioning to occur. This story is very, very devastating, but it also is a fantastic, not only character study, character examination, but also it really looks at the way these big concepts like propaganda, like an entire society that has essentially been brainwashed and controlled, has these big concepts, but then it zeroes them in on specific characters and you see the effects of that. So it feels very grand and big in that sense, but then on an individual basis, it feels extremely devastating. A heads up, when you first start it, I feel like it's going to throw you for a loop a little bit. It actually took me a while to get into it, and then once I did get into it, I was like, oh, I understand now why this book is, at the time, it was taking off. It's now quite a darling here on BookTube and general bookish internet, but I was skeptical for a while, and then I really did fall in love with it. Next up, we have the Winnowing Flame trilogy, one of my all-time favorites. If you love epic fantasy, definitely give this one a go. I would say this one could also be a summer recommendation because it has extremely high stakes, and for me, it was quite a page-turner. I always wanted to know what was going to happen next. I also could see it in fall because there are some aspects to it that feel slightly more horror-leaning, but we do also have some fantastic creatures over the course of this series. The setup initially is that you have this land that previously there was this massive tree that was allowing for a certain race of beings to feed off of it. This race was known as the Aborans. However, this tree is starting to die, and now, as a result, the Aborans themselves are starting to die out, which a lot of people are not too choked up about, humankind especially, because the Aborans had hunted them for a long time because as the tree was starting to die, they discovered they could maintain their near immortality by drinking the blood of humans. But the problem with the Aborans dying out is the Aborans hold all the secrets to understanding the threats that have plagued this planet in the past, and this is because of the fact that they live such long lives. And it would seem that whatever this strange thing is that nobody really knows all that much about, there's just this idea that that is probably going to return, but what that even is and what it looks like and how to fight against it, nobody really knows. So you have a character who's trying to research this, you have one of the last remaining Aborans, and then you have a character who is a witch. Not a witch quite in the way we typically think of witches, but a person with powers. And it, similar to the Bone Shard Daughter or the Drowning Empire trilogy, I do think there's a learning curve, you could say, where it takes you a little bit to get into, and then once your feet are on the ground, you're like, wait, but hold on. And I loved that feeling as I was reading. And then once you're in it, you really don't know how things are going to turn out. Next up, we have a cozy fantasy, and that would be the Spellshop. The idea behind this story is that we have this young woman who was a librarian. She really loved her job. It was a little isolating, but she enjoyed the work. However, when there is some kind of uprising occurring, she gathers a lot of the books that she works with and runs. But she realizes that technically to do that is a very high crime because these books hold a lot of answers to magic and how to use magic, which the government has a firm grasp on. They don't want just any old person having access to this information. She, in her efforts to escape, doesn't even really think about this because the situation was so extreme, so she just went on the run, and now her fear is that if the resistance failed and the previous government is still in power, she might be punished for taking these books away. If the uprising was successful, maybe there's a chance it's fine, but she doesn't know because the place that she has gone to seek safety is a very rural area. It's kind of the middle of nowhere, and it also happens to be where she is from. So it's kind of like a return to her roots, and she's also trying to confront, maybe she's a little lonelier than she realized, and it is through this small town feel, these really nosy neighbors, and also her efforts to help this town, that a little bit she starts to come out of her shell and appreciate life in a different way than maybe she did before. There's also a sentient spider plant in this story, so it's not quite animal companion, but there's a companion element that is quite darling. And then last for today is Piranesi, and this is a difficult one to recommend because of the fact that you don't want to say too much. I think that's true for anybody that's read it and recommends it. They don't want to give away anything because the whole book is an experience. And also kind of tying things full circle, I talked about the very first recommendation. Didn't really work for me, but I could see it working for other people. Also, I think that Piranesi is very good, but I didn't like it. But I still highly recommend it because it is unlike anything I've read before. You are following a character and they seem to be in a certain place that they are trying to learn everything about and understand everything about. And that's all I'm going to say about it. But it really resonates with a lot of people. It's deeply impactful for a lot of people. And I do think that if you've never read it and you want to give it a try, this would be a good time of year to do so. That's it though for a list of some adult fantasy spring recommendations. I'll have all of these linked in a pinned comment, but additionally, if you have your own recommendations, feel free to leave those so that way anyone that comes to this video doesn't just have my recommendations, but yours as well. If you do happen to live in the Southern Hemisphere, I'll have my previous fall recommendations videos linked so that way that you feel a little bit more included as well. Thanks so much for watching though. I hope you have a great rest of your day and I'll see you later. Bye.